to Adam was she took a grape, a cluster of grapes, and she squeezed it, and she gave this to him, and that, of course, that was the according to that medrash, that was the Chet Tzadas, and we all know what came from there. We know that 10 generations later, when Adam came out of the Teva, the Torah tells us, Vayita kerem vayesht min hayayin vayishkar, that he planted a vineyard, and he drank from the wine, and he became intoxicated. And the Rabbi here explains that that Noach was actually attempting to be metaken what Chava attempted to do, or I should not say what Chava attempted to do, but what Chava caused to happen by giving Adam the wine. And so he explains like this, that Noach's intention was that it's known. The pasuk tells us in Shoftim, Yayin hamesameach elakim va'anashim, that wine is something that brings joy. And so Noach figured that by planting a grapevine and by drinking wine, he'll be able to bring about a simcha that will be metaken for the Chet Tzadas. Now, the connection, or I should say the comparison there, is that Chava also had good intentions and intended to bring about simcha, but Chava's simcha came from a taiva, as the pasuk says, "Vatera ha'isha ki toiva eitz lemachal." She saw that the fruit was good to eat, v'chisava hu le'inayim, and that it was a taiva to her eyes. It was a desire, and that's where she went wrong. And so Noach's attempt was that just as Chava felt was margish that she was margish, the taiva, the desire that drove her to use to eat from the fruit and to give to Adam. Noach also wanted to create a hargasha, a physical sensation, again to be metaken for that, but he was not able to. He did not succeed at this. And why didn't he succeed? He didn't succeed because he misused the wine. Instead of using it as yayin hamasameach, wine that makes one happy, he used it as yayin hamishaker, yayin, that wine that intoxicates. He overdid it. He probably overdid it physically, and he likely overdid it spiritually. And so he went beyond the parameters of how wine can have a positive effect into the wine having a negative effect. The Rabbi points out very interestingly here, that when Noach drank the wine, he didn't do it with bittul. And that's why he didn't do it with self-nullification or self-abnegation. And that's why, because he didn't have the bittul, that's why, rather than having the outcome, the effect of simcha, he had the effect of intoxication. So to step away from the text for a second, I think this is a key element to the Jewish approach to consuming wine and even becoming intoxicated. There are times in the year, Simchas Torah is coming up, and we know Purim as well, that's a time where there are certainly opinions that say that it's a mitzvah in some cases, or at least some kind of an inyan to drink wine to intoxication. But even wine to intoxication could be yayin hamasameach if there's the component of bittul there as well. And so a surefire way to misuse wine is to do it in a way where one's self and one's arrogance is first and foremost, and others and the simcha shal mitzvah and the things that we're supposed to be more connected to are secondary. And I began to say that, interestingly, the Rebbe notes that even though we said that Noach drank from the wine because he wanted to have this hargasha, he wanted to have this physical sensation, to be metaken for Chava, for her physical desire that she had, the Rebbe says that even though when one becomes intoxicated, they lose their sensitivity, they lose, you lose hargasha, you feel less, but here he says that losing your feeling, or that that loss, what we would call in the psychological jargon, that loss of inhibition, and that numbing of emotions, that happens. That can happen because of anava and bittul, because of humility and bittul, or it can happen because of bilbul hadas. And the Rebbe says that bilbul hadas, a confusion of the mind, and what probably we could say would be, losing oneself behaviorally and letting oneself too loose. This is actually not the absence of hargasha. This is actually this is an Indian of hargasha. So this is when a person drinks that way, it's in a way where their self is felt in a very critical way, in that it's not for the purposes of, it's not out of humility and bittul. So where else do we have this idea that wine can cause problems? That wine, where do we see else in the Torah where wine is misused? So we know that the other prominent story is the story of Aaron HaKohen and his two, I should say the two sons of Aaron HaKohen, Nadav and Avihu. And the Torah tells us in Parshas Shmini what they did, that they were makriv in Eish Zara, a carbon that they weren't called on to be makriv, and because they weren't because they didn't give the carbon the way they were supposed to, or they were not supposed to, and they did it even though they were commanded otherwise, or they were commanded not to, or I should say, even though they were not commanded to, they suffered the penalty, a very severe penalty of death. In Achrei Mos, the beginning of Achrei Mos Kedoshim, which we just read, Achrei Mos I should say, which we just read in Yom Kippur, we find that the Torah records their death, and says it was Bekarva Sam Lifnei Hashem Vayomusu, that they came close to Hashem and they died. And Chassidus has its explanation, its interpretation of that event, and how they were trying to achieve great spiritual heights. But the Torah continues after that and gives a commandment and says, Yain v'shecher al teish ta'ato v'necha. The Eibusha tells Aaron HaKohen that from here forward you shall not drink alcoholic beverages, you shall not become intoxicated before doing the work in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because for similar reasons to what we've talked about so far. Because becoming intoxicated can make someone lose their ability to have a handle on what they're supposed to do, what the Rabbi, I think, referred to in the other places, Bilbul Hadas. And because of that, there's the possibility that one will allow, rather than enhancing their humility and bittul, that it would cause chas v'shalom the opposite. And there's no place for that in the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And so, to this day, Kohanim are warned against excessive drunkenness, especially since, as we know, Mashiach can come any moment, and at that time there will be Kohanim who will have to be prepared to do the Avodah, and so to become intoxicated is particularly problematic for Kohanim. So it's clear that alcohol can be misused. And so the question then becomes, again, what is proper use, and what's proper use, not just physically, not just in terms of how much can one drink or should one be able to drink. I think that's discussed in other places, and there are limitations and various opinions about what those are, and it's certainly not my place to make absolute statements about that. But what I think is important is that we recognize that when we're drinking for Simcha, for Zman Simchasenu, Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, Simchas Torah is coming up, and all of that, that it needs to be with the proper foundation, with the proper background of doing it for the proper intentions. And I think it's safe to say that when one is not doing it for the proper intentions, there's no inyan. There's no advantage to becoming intoxicated if all that's going to happen is you're going to feel more of you and others are going to see more of you. And, I think it has been interesting for me. I don't currently do this, but at one point I worked for a while in a drug and alcohol treatment center, and it became apparent to me that there is different ways that people exist, different ways people are when they're intoxicated. Some people easily lose themselves, and when that's the case, I would venture to say that the potential for addiction, for example, is much greater, because you're drinking to, or one who drinks in that way is drinking to lose themselves, which, as I said before, is not in a good way, and is not does not see through the idea of humility and bittul. But when one knows why they're drinking, and knows and focuses and intentionally drinks to bring about a simcha, so that they can do what the Eibusher wants them to do in a time of simcha, and that they know that they're doing it right when they're behaving properly, which is with additional simcha and additional avas Yisrael and avas reim, then you can see when it's a problem and when it's not a problem. Before I conclude, I want to just bring out one or two more points that are discussed at length in Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, in Drushim L'Sukkos. There's a mimer that I believe is, you always hear, it's a well-known mimer, a well-known sikha. I don't know what's well-known, because most of the time when it's something well-known, I've never heard of it before. And of course that's a confession that I make, that maybe I should know more of the well-known maimarim. But anyways, I believe this Ushafta Mayim B'Sasein is known as a well-known maimar. And the Alter Rebbe here, I think, really talks about, in very lofty oisias, but I think it's not a leap to make some very practical interpretations and applications to his to how he explains this idea of here it's focused on Nisach HaMayim and Nisach HaYayin. So specifically as it relates to the practice of Nisach HaYayin on Sukkos, the Alter Rebbe teaches us as follows. He says like this. I think it's Gewaldike Oisius. It really spoke to me. Simcha, the idea of Simcha is Gilui HaHelam. Simcha is the idea of revealing something that's hidden within us. When we find ourselves having Simcha in the proper way, what we're doing is we're actuating a potential that we've had, and we're bringing it out into an apparent way that others can see, that we can experience something that we actually feel physically in our body. There are sensations that come along with joy, as well as others can sometimes see that as well. And there's this idea of Simcha is connected to the concept of Bina. Of all the spheres, Bina is the one that's related to Simcha. Why? Because Bina has the similar theme of revealing that which was concealed. The concept of Chachma is one of where a nugget of wisdom exists in its most concentrated, condensed form, and the idea of Bina is the expression of that into many details and into a way that can be understood and deliver to others and so forth. So this, in a similar way, wine, in a similar way, simcha is this idea of drawing out from within. And so, he then connects us to the avodah of the Leviim, and then he says, and this was done through the shir, through the song of the Leviim, which was done ala yayin, on wine. What's the advantage of wine? What does it bring out for us? As I mentioned before, the pasuk yayin hamasameach elikim va'anoshim, that wine has this property of bringing about happiness, and the happiness that's brought about by wine is not just a happiness where internally we now feel happy when we previously didn't feel happy, but it also extends that happiness to another person, because sometimes something could happen to you and you feel happy. A very personal example that happened yesterday. Yesterday, there was the completion of a sale of a house. I owned a house, and the closing was yesterday, and the house now belongs to Baruch Hashem, another Lubavitcher family, and so forth. That was a joyous feeling. It was a joyous feeling for me, because for a number of reasons, and it was a joyous feeling for the buyer as well. And if you've ever purchased a home, there's a certain geschmack, there's a certain satisfaction that comes with that. But you could have that satisfaction and walk to mincha, and the person davening next to you doesn't necessarily know that something transpired. But wine and drinking an alcoholic beverage has this ability to so to speak, to allow you to exude the simcha to others, so that others also experience this simcha that you're having. This is also connected, I'm not going to connect it in depth, but also connected to the idea of nichnas yayin yotza soid, that when wine goes in, secrets come out. Again, that same theme that what was hidden now becomes revealed. And so a final point here, so I think that is the final point, but to tie it together, so what we see here is that when when alcohol is used in a way that it brings about a true simcha, and it brings about a simcha that not only you feel, but that you can spread to others, and bring them an increase in joy, that's a fantastic koyach that we have, and a zchus that we have. And unless you're someone who knows that drinking either in small amounts or in large amounts leads to not good things, we have a commandment to do so. As I said before, the mitzvah of v'samachta b'chagecha is through drinking. And you have to drink, you have to drink at least the revi'as, and you have to drink, and we know now that you have to drink in a way that you actually feel it, and that it makes you feel good, and that your mindset is in the right way, and so forth. But of course, we need to be aware of our limitations and the limitations of those around us. Sometimes there are people around us who struggle with this kind of a nisayon, or you could call it a disease or an addiction, or however you might think of it, and so in those cases it's very important to be mindful. Avos Yisrael means that you're not thinking of yourself, you're thinking of the other. Bittul and anava means that you're not thinking of yourself, you're thinking of the other. So if you know and you're satisfactorily convinced that by drinking you can not only feel joy but spread that joy, then you know you're doing it in a way that's according to the Torah. And if you're aware of other people around you, that this is going to bring them down and this is going to be a pitfall for them, then you need to be very careful, I think, about how you do that. So with that, I conclude tonight. Thank you for watching and for participating. And if you have any comments or questions, certainly put them in above, and I'll do my best to respond.